The Kensington Rune. The Kensington Rune is a large stone with runes carved in it that some believe may have been carved by Vikings. It's 31 inches tall, 16 inches wide, 6 inches thick, and it weighs about 202 pounds. The interesting thing about the Kensington Rune is that it was discovered in Minnesota. If it is authentic, it will change the history of the United States as we know it. The story goes that the Kensington Rune was found in a small farming community near Kensington, Minnesota in 1898. Some versions say that a boy named Edward Oman found it. Another version says that it was his father, Olaf Oman, who found it. It may have been found in the root of a tree, but it's uncertain. It was certainly found underground, though. At least every version of the story has it that way. Regardless of how it was discovered or who discovered it, the Kensington Rune wound up in the hands of Olaf Oman, who began looking for an explanation. There is no evidence that he actively sought out monetary gain from the Kensington Rune, though. No one claimed to be able to translate it until 1907, when a University of Wisconsin graduate with a history major, Mr. Holland, came up with the following translation. 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on exploration journey from Vinland over the west. We camped by 2 skerries 1 day journey from the stone. We were and fished 1 day. After we came home, 10 men red with blood were tortured. Hail Virgin Mary, saved from evil. Have 10 men by sea to look after ships. 14-day journey from this island. Year 1362. 5 members from the Minnesota Historical Society investigated this stone for 1.5 years and concluded that it was authentic. There is some evidence that the Vikings may have made it as far as Minnesota. What appear to be 5 Viking camps, where holes have been carved into rock similar to those used by Vikings to moor boats, have been found between the Hudson Bay and Sauk Center, Minnesota. Some Norse-looking tools have also been found in the area. It's postulated that some Vikings became stranded in the U.S. when they could not make it back to their ship in time for their return journey. This would explain why some of the maiden Native American tribes in the area have blue-eyed individuals and knowledge of Christianity before accepted history tells us we should have learned about Christ. None of these things is certain proof that Vikings at least visited the area or proved that the Kensington Rune is authentic. The other evidence that can be taken into account is that the Kensington Rune itself, it was once proven to be a hoax by a runologist who did not recognize one of the characters on the stone. Later, another runologist found somewhat rare rune in the other text. This does not prove that the Kensington Rune is real. However, it does not prove that it is fake. But it will be hard to prove if it's not real. Grey Cloud Island. The reports of ghostly sightings and paranormal activity are so extensive at Grey Cloud Island, it is difficult to determine which is an urban legend and which is fact. So many stories and reports made Grey Cloud Island considered one of the most haunted places in Minnesota. One of the most popular reports of paranormal activity is that of the Green Lantern. Based on different stories, there are those that say a former Indian chief wanders around the cemetery carrying a green lantern. Others report he simply wanders around the cemetery. Further stories claim that the green lantern is not carried by anyone. The unusual green light simply appears to move through the cemetery grounds, the woods, and along local roads. Some people have claimed to see the greenish light in the form of an orb or a cloud. Other people state that they have seen regular orbs around the cemetery and surrounding areas. There are also a number of reports that the Grey Cloud Woman, the second, wanders around Grey Cloud Island despite the fact that she is buried on a reservation with her mother, the original Grey Cloud Woman. Since the area has a great many Native American burial mounds, there are those that claim activity on the island is related to the spirits of the deceased. On nights with a full moon, people have stated they can hear the sound of drums beating. Hearing the howling of coyotes at night or the barking is also something many people swear they have heard when on the island. People who have visited the island also claim that the air is very heavy and thick, making it hard for someone to breathe. This particular claim is one that other people adamantly dispute, as they have never experienced anything like it. A rather unusual bit of activity that numerous people have claimed to experience is a white truck appears to chase people on the island. Some say the truck appears and vanishes without a trace. Others claim that the truck has no driver. Those that have experienced the truck are adamant that it is not made up. And there's reports of a ghostly apparition on a motorcycle that follows people and vanishes into thin air. Some people do dispute the story of the pickup truck as locals who just want to chase off nosy trespassers. When it comes to a lot of the paranormal activity that is reported, there's a lot of connection to the Gray Cloud Cemetery, or tombstones in general. There is one report that within the cemetery sits a row of 12 tombstones that belong to a group of nuns. People claim that you can walk and count the 12 tombstones, but if you turn around and recount the tombstones, you will not be able to count 12 the second time. The stories of unusual activity in the cemetery are abundant. There are reports that people can hear disembodied voices, while other people claim to hear horrified screams of a woman. Other reports from paranormal enthusiasts claim to have seen a man wearing a red flannel jacket and an orange hat while smoking, and carrying a rifle. The sight wouldn't have caused any issue for those who have seen him, except for the man was translucent. There's so many accounts from people, from just driving past the cemetery or just around the island, that there's just an overwhelming feeling of uneasiness that creeps into people. Countless haunted stories continue to be told about the Great Cloud Island. Locals would prefer if most people simply did not visit the island, as they claim there is no unusual activity whatsoever. Other avid ghost hunters claim that there is plenty of unusual activity in the area, from orbs to screams, odd feelings, and sightings of everything from long-deceased Native Americans to a ghost of a woman. The soap factory. Soap factories are horrible places even today because they involve the slaughter of thousands of animals whose body fats are rendered to make soap. One can only imagine what sort of cruel, vindictive spirits such places have attracted in the past, when conditions for both the animals and the workers were much worse. The Soap Factory Art Gallery in Minneapolis stands as a perfect example of this. Named for its location in an old soap factory that also made artificial limbs for wounded Civil War veterans, the building's basement is famously haunted by a malevolent entity. Skilled paranormal researchers have described it as demonic. But this deters the gallery's owner not one bit. Instead, they've cashed in on the basement's reputation by hosting an annual haunted house event on the site. It's said to be so intense that you have to sign a waiver just to go in. But who knows how much of what goes on there is staged, and how much is genuinely just haunted? What better place to hide a real demon than among a bunch of fake ones? Smiley face killings. A popular conspiracy theory holds that a national network of serial murderers, dubbed the Smiley Face Killers, have been preying on college-aged white men in the northern states for decades. The theory postulates the killer or killers nab the inebriated frat boy types from outside bars and dump their bodies in frigid waters to destroy the evidence. But they always leave a calling card to taunt police, a prominent smiley face painted or drawn on a surface at the body's dump site. Most deaths attributed to the smiley face killers have been ruled accidental drownings, but one of them, the one that led private investigators to codify their theory, happened in Minneapolis and was later determined to have, in fact, been a murder. On Halloween night in 2002, University of Minnesota student Chris Jenkins was kicked out of a bar in Minneapolis and vanished without a trace. His body was found months later, encased in the ice in the Mississippi River, face up, with his hands folded across his chest and still wearing his Halloween costume. His death was initially ruled an accident, but persistence by his parents and a tip from a criminal informant got Jenkins' death ruled a homicide. And that's when New York-based Private Eye Kevin Gannon and Anthony Darut, both former New York Police Department detectives, arrived, seeking connections to another case they'd been working on. Similarities in the two MOs lead them to uncover a pattern of mysterious drowning deaths involving college students along the I-94 corridor in Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. In many of those cases, a creepy smiley face had been painted on a tree or other surface near the victim's body, where the victim's body had been discovered. And so, the smiley face killer theory was born. Gannon and Darut believe that a group of highly organized killers are targeting college men across several states, and have racked up a body count of more than 40 victims. UFO attack. Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson was having a night like most nights in Marshall County, Minnesota, with the rural country road seemingly empty and quiet all the way to North Dakota border, but at 1:40 a.m. on August 27, 1979, Val Johnson's life would change forever. He was about to have a head-on collision with a UFO. A good officer accustomed to night patrols knows the different shapes and outlines of vehicles at night. From tractors to cars to semis, a good cop can distinguish between all. But when Deputy Sheriff saw a bright light out to his side, he couldn't quite place it. Thinking at first it may have been an airplane about to crash, he turned to get a better look. At that moment, the strange light catapulted itself nearly a mile and a half towards his car in an instant. Johnson heard the sound of breaking glass, was blinded by the light, and then lost consciousness for over a half of an hour. When Johnson finally came to, his car was sitting off the road with skid marks across the highway. He radioed for help at 2:19 a.m., and the backup soon arrived and called for an ambulance to take the perplexed and exhausted Johnson to a hospital. While there, he was treated for shock, and doctors noticed he'd also suffered welder's burns on his eyes from the bright light. Up to this point, it would be easy to say someone may have blinded him with a bright light somehow, causing him to maybe close his eyes and run off the road, which caused him to bump his head. Then they started to inspect his police cruiser. The car was damaged, but in the most particular of ways. The inside headlights on the driver's side were knocked out, but the other three headlights, including the one right next to it, were fine. There were fresh dents on the hood, and no other damage to suspect the dent and headlight were part of some accident. There was a crack on the windshield with 4 very different impact spots. It seems as if the car had been in several different accidents all at once. The strange damage and bizarre story were enough for the sheriff's office to call in investigators from the Center for UFO Studies. The investigators then called in a windshield expert from Ford, who noted, even after several days of reflection on the crack patterns and apparent sequence of fractures, I still have no explanation for what seems to be an inward and outward forces acting almost simultaneously. I can only conclude that all the cracks were from mechanical forces of unknown origin. To add to the strangeness of the whole thing, 2 or 3 antennas on the car were bent at odd angles. And Johnson's watch and patrol car clock were now 14 minutes behind. The investigators called the folks from Honeywell to examine the antennas, clock, and overall damage. But, like the man from Ford, they all seemed baffled by the damage to the car. At the end of the investigation, all experts agree that there were no good explanations for this event. Could this car be some of the best true evidence of a UFO encounter? That's for you to decide. Ghouls, I hope you enjoyed these Minnesota urban legends. The last one. Do you think it was a UFO? Or do you think it was like alien or paranormal? Or do you think it could be explained somehow, even though 2 professionals couldn't explain it? That's your question. Try to explain it. There we go. Because I have no idea how it would happen. It just seems interesting to me. And I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments. But as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.